ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Amy Simatos.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. So I have a question. How many of you came here to take your results to a new level? How many of you came here for a reason other than that? Okay, I always like to get a gauge of my audience. My name is Amy Simatos, and that is exactly what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give you the top 5 secrets, tips, tools, tricks of top sales performers. And the challenge I have is that I typically present this in about a 1 to 2 hour workshop. So I'm going to condense it a bit, and I'm going to try to get it into 15 minutes. Why am I an expert on this subject? I'll share that with you as well. But before I do that, I want to share that I've spent, and I did give you a handout in case you want to really know more about me, and if you want to follow along with the steps, I put them on this handout as well. But I've spent about the past 20 years in sales and marketing. With that, I've been through a lot of sales trainings. I've read a lot of books. I've had a lot of moments when I wanted to quit and give up and said, I hate sales. I don't ever know why I got into this profession to begin with. I've had moments where I was on stage and I was recognized as being a top performer. So out of all of that is how I've created these 5 tools that I'm going to share with you. Before I do that, though, I want to take a moment and I want to thank all of you. Because you could have been anywhere else right now. You could have left before the bonus session started, but instead you decided to stay. And to me, that is something that I did along my journey of being a better sales professional, is I constantly immersed myself in tools, seminars, information, listening to other people to get ideas on how I could be better. So I acknowledge you for that. So why do I have the right to talk to you about this? I want to tell you a little bit about myself. Is that okay since we're going to spend some time together?
Sure.
Okay, everybody? Okay. When I got into the sales profession, I was about 18 years old. I was an undergraduate at the University of Kansas, and my first role was, as we were talking earlier, to call you during your dinner and try to sell you the Amico multi-card. So I started out in telemarketing. From there, after I got out of school, I got into telesales. I sold cellular phone and paging services in St. Louis to businesses and consumers. I decided I wanted to take the big step. I then wanted to get into direct sales. I wanted to get out there and face-to-face sell to people. So I got into payroll services. And I will never forget that moment, because that was one of the first things I learned in sales, is if you're going to sell anything, it has got to be something you're absolutely passionate about. I found out very quickly I was not interested in accounting, payroll services, or 401k sales. I also remember another moment about starting in the outside sales world is that I walked into it thinking it was going to be easy. I thought, I'm going to get to go out to lunch, I'm going to get to go out with clients, I get to do whatever I want and drive my car around all day, and I thought it was going to be a blast. And I remember quickly thinking, what did I get myself into? The first day on the job, I was handed a big book, and the book said, these are your prospects. And my manager said to me, start making some phone calls. Wow. I remember thinking to myself, okay, Mom was in sales for 20 years. My dad was a sales manager. This isn't for me. But this little voice inside of my head said to me, if you will stick with this for 1 year and learn how to do this thing called sales, maybe you could go find a product you're more interested in. That's exactly what I did. 1 year to the date I started working for this payroll company, I left, and then I got into the world of healthcare and medical sales. I loved it. Why? Number one, it tied into some of my values. My values are taking care of people, wellness, being in service to others, and helping other people feel better. And I felt like selling medical products to hospitals was a correlation to that value I had. So I enjoyed it. Once I got into supply sales, I decided I want to take the next big step. I want to sell capital equipment. I want to sell multi-million-dollar systems to hospitals. And I started doing that in the early 2000s. And originally, again, I thought, oh, this will be great. I'm going to make all this big money. People in this profession make 6 figures. And wow, did I find out quickly it was going to be a lot of work. I was selling expensive systems to hospital executives, systems that took anywhere from 6 months to 3 years to close. And I was dealing with a variety of different personalities, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, once I finally got good at what I was doing, I became a sales field trainer. And my mission at that point, it's when that light bulb went off above my head when I said, if I could do this full time and take the past 15 years of sales that I've had and all the mistakes I made and just teach it to somebody else, wouldn't that be awesome? And that's exactly why I'm here today. So what are these tips that I'm talking about? That's exactly what I'm going to jump into right now. And if you look at the handout again, they're in front of you if you want to follow along. One of the first tips I learned when I got into this payroll sales position I was in is activity. I remember the one thing that they constantly coached us on and preached about was that you have got to be doing activity every single day. Now, I learned that early in my career, but later in my career, a couple years ago, I made the biggest sale that I'd ever made. It booked at about $13 million. And as Tony Robbins would say, when things are going great, we party. And that's what I was doing. I was excited. I thought I could kind of put my feet up and not have to work as hard anymore. Then things started going like this with my sales results. When things aren't going well, Tony Robbins says we ponder. And that's exactly what I did. I thought to myself, what in the heck am I doing? I mean, I was doing great. I was on the top of the sales board. And then I got the notice that I was going to be put on sales probation. So I went and I hired a coach. The other part of activity is accountability. And we talked about this earlier. Accountability means you need to hold yourself accountable. And if you can't hold yourself accountable, get somebody that will. Hire a coach, get a partner, get a mastermind buddy, get somebody. But what I started doing is I started to track. The first thing the coach said is, I want you, Amy, every week, I want you to track how many phone calls are you making, how many appointments are you getting, how many sales are you making, and then what is your goal in each of those areas. And I remember when I first did this, it was a very painful exercise because I had put my feet up for quite a while. Once I started doing that, my results got back on track. I went into the fourth quarter that year at 37% of my quota. I was on sales probation, and I ended on the backside at 137% of my number. And that year I made the top 10 of my sales force, and I got the largest commission check I ever made within a 6-month span of refocusing on activity and accountability. The next tip that I want to share with you is a challenger mindset. Does anybody remember that book called Spin Selling? Anybody heard of it? Yep, okay. Spin selling was the breakthrough sales methodology of the last millennium. The breakthrough for this millennium is called the Challenger Sale, and the author of that book is Matt Dixon. This book is groundbreaking because we are now moving away from what we call solution sales. The go in, ask the questions, find the problems, the implications, the needs payoff. What we need to do now is we are finding, and this book it's all research done by the Corporate Executive Board, which is a research company. They went out to the market, and what they're finding is that customers do not buy products or solutions. They want to buy your insights. They want to hear what your insights are on their business. So before you go into that account, it's not about asking them all those questions. You need to find out as much as you can before you go in. And then once you know what the insights are, for instance, healthcare. What are the insights in healthcare? Most hospitals are not making any profits right now. What's some insight I could share with them? I could share with them, hey, I've got a way that I could help to reduce that revenue gap. I want to talk to you about it. Okay, great. What is it? But it's about going with unique insights and presenting that to the customer and having the ability to challenge them and to create healthy tension. I know tension is something that I had to learn because it's not my natural style, but the tension is when you're, like, Mark is awesome at this. One thing I love about Mark is that he's great about asking a question and closing his mouth and waiting to see what someone's going to say. He's comfortable with that silence. That's what Challenger is all about. So if you've not read that book, I highly and strongly suggest it. The third piece is influence. And I love this because we're already talking about this here in this group, the personality mastery. Influence, why is it so important? If you don't understand the style of the person that you're trying to sell something to, you're not going to connect with them and you don't have the ability to influence them. And I know this firsthand because I actually got thrown out of a hospital one time because the person in the purchasing department was a driver. I didn't know that. I just went in and started walking around and meeting people and inviting myself in to talk to people. And the people I was meeting with were mostly amiables and expressives, and they were nice, and we had some good conversations. But he found out about that. I violated the hospital's policy. I didn't sign into their vendor credentialing system, and him and I had some words with each other. And it took me some time to get over it, but when I look back, it was because I didn't respect the man's authority. Had I respected his authority and understood the policy and worked with that a little bit better, the guy probably could have been my champion. Instead, I had to bring in my manager to end up closing the sale, and I wasn't even allowed to go back in the hospital, but a good lesson learned. So it's not just about understanding that person, it's also about, now that I understand them, how am I going to be versatile? And versatile is something else I train sales reps on, and that means that how am I going to adjust my personality so that when I am with that driver, when I am with that amiable, when I am with that analytical, that they're comfortable with me. When I first got into sales, I was expressive to the 100th degree. Talk. I never wanted to listen to anybody. I just wanted to share my ideas, and I couldn't understand why people didn't always want to meet with me or return my phone calls. Better yet, do business with me. So versatility is the key to influence with what I've learned in my experience. Objection handling. Objections really are questions in disguise, but how many of you can relate to this? You get an objection, and what's the first thing that we typically want to do? Anybody want to throw it out?
Get defensive.
Get defensive. What else?
Talking back.
Talking back. One of the things I used to catch myself doing is giving them more and more and more and more information, but then finding out on the back end that the information I was providing really wasn't what they were looking for. So what I mean by objections, to me, objections are buying signals. When someone's objecting to you, they're really telling you, I'm interested in what you have to offer, but I need some more information from you. And most people in a sales cycle are going to say no up to 7 times before they're going to say yes to you. So be prepared for that. So objections is something that typically invokes nervousness and an uncomfortable feeling, but if you think of it as a question in disguise, and if you think of it as a buying signal and an opportunity to listen, it could end up being your sale. I remember one time I had an account that had been with my company for 13 years, and they were getting ready to go with a competitor because they said that they were cheaper. The purchasing manager called me and he said, Amy, we're going to go with this other company. I'm not going to mention their name. And I remember, I felt that gut kick you get when you lose a sale. I called my manager and she said to me, you know what, Amy, find out what he really wants. Find out why he really wants to go with that company. And I did. I called him back. I put on my amiable hat because he was very amiable. And I said, Craig, we've been partners for 13 years. I really hate to see you go this other direction. What else do you really need here? And he said, oh, it was that one thing that you wrote that maintenance program was going to cost me $13,000 a year. I don't want to pay for that. I don't think I need it. Okay, we'll take it off the agreement. So his objections about some of the pricing, once I really found out what it was, I thankfully was able to turn that deal around, and we ended up getting the sale, and he's still a customer of ours today. But it was a great learnable moment for me in terms of objections and not just walking away, finding out what else it is that he's objecting to. Closing and communication. Now, I know that we might think in sales the most important thing is I just got to be a good closer. How many of you think that in sales you just got to be able to ask for the business? It's a lot more than that. Good. Okay, I'm glad I'm not seeing everybody's hands go in the air. Outside of this group, I'm also really involved in Toastmasters, and for those of you who don't know Toastmasters International, it's a public speaking group. But it never fails. We get guests that come into the meetings, and everybody's, oh, that's really nice. It's nice to meet you, Lisa. It's great. I hope to see you the next time. And nobody ever says, Lisa, how will this program benefit you? Would you like to sign up? I don't ever see anybody do that. I'm like the only, maybe because I'm the salesperson at heart, but I'm like the only person that usually will ask somebody that. So closing means you got to ask for the commitment, but closing means so much more than that. If you don't set up the opportunity in the beginning by providing the insights, by knowing the right needs of the customer, when you get to that back end of closing, it's going to be very difficult to get their commitment because you really have not, as we say, earned the right to ask for the business at that point. The other word I wrote next to that is communication, and I did mention Toastmasters. One of the books I also recommend is a book called Getting to Veto or Selling to Veto, The Very Important Top Officer. If you've not read that book and you're in sales, get it. But I remember reading that book, and in the first, I think it's the first chapter, it says if you're going to sell to anybody or work with anybody at any level, especially executive level in sales, you need to join Toastmasters. And I thought, okay, I'd given some really cruddy presentations. One time my manager was in the room. I gave one of the worst presentations I have ever given. And it was like that kick in the stomach when I thought, that's it. I've got to get better at this, and I've got to get over my fear of public speaking. So I joined this group. But really what I want to talk to you about, that whole communication piece, is how are you presenting yourself in front of your customers? Are you saying and ah? Are you fidgeting? Are you talking too fast? That was a big issue I used to have. I used to talk 100 miles a minute when I was in front of somebody because I was so nervous all the time. But how am I communicating in a way such that I'm making an impact with somebody? And if I am afraid of being in front of a group of people, what am I going to do to address that? Again, just a pitch for Toastmasters, less than $100 a year. It's a great place to go practice your communication skills. With that, everything I've talked about today, as I mentioned, was from books I've read, seminars I've been to, trainings I've been to, mentors. But I think the most important takeaway from this is that it's about learnable moments. And the only way you can get the learnable moments is by getting out there and doing it. And so learnable moments is the times that I felt like I wanted to quit and give up. So for any of you that are in the entrepreneur arena or the sales arena, if there's ever a moment that you feel like you want to quit, give up, not do this anymore, you're doing the right thing. Because it's totally natural to feel that way. It's all a part of selling yourself, being an entrepreneur, and making a difference for other people. Do I have a couple minutes for questions? Okay.
Can we give you a hand?
Thank you.
Can I ask some questions?
Sure.
So the first thing is the activity. So how can we, I think for the surface area, the most important thing is to get to know more people, have more connection. So how do you create all these activities? What kind of activities?
Yeah, activity for me is everything from going to groups like this. To me, it's networking. It is referrals. You know what else I do when I'm building my sales training business on the side? I also just go to Monster and I go to Career Builder and I find any business that's looking for salespeople. What does that tell me? That tells me that whatever process they got in place to retain sales talent is not working. And so depending on what profession you're in, I think it's a matter of, I'm also just using a manual Excel spreadsheet. I'm tracking every week. Who are the businesses I'm talking to? What's the next step? Do I have a meeting set up with them? So I do keep that manual. I just have the bread and butter Excel spreadsheet is where I track it. I mean, there's ACT database. There's a lot of places you can track that activity. But I would just invite you to whatever industry you're in, tap into any type of groups that are relevant to your industry or populations that would be interested in your services.
Okay, building your own database and follow up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's what I did.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
How long take you to like this?
How long?
How long take you?
20 years.
To be able to stand up in front with all of you today and to not be a nervous wreck and have the bomb speaking experience I had. It took me about 6 years of practicing speaking to be able to do this, but the sales piece, I got into sales right out of college, so 1994. 20 years.
Wow.
Lots of practice.
Lots of practice, definitely. Yes? Question?
You talked about activity, and of course that's very important. How do you structure your activity so that you maintain productivity?
I think it's, for myself, it's a matter of, I think the two key things that I have to constantly push myself on is set weekly goals, minimize distractions, and put the time on your calendar. I block time on my calendar. Most of the time it ends up being evenings, but I block the time that I'm going to be focusing on my prospecting, my marketing, my contacts. I find when I don't put that time on my calendar, it just never happens. There's always something that comes up. There's an email, there's a phone call, there's something else I have to take care of, I find. Any other questions?
Sorry. Second one, for the follow-up, usually how many times you follow up with some clients?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good question. One of my sales managers taught me one time that you, especially when you're new in sales, you're really enthusiastic and you just want to get appointments, but it's important you don't follow up every day because people, A, they think you have nothing to do, and B, they're not going to want to pick up the phone when you're calling them because they might think that you're, stalking them.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to just set myself a guideline to follow up within 7 days, unless somebody says, hey, call me on Friday and today's Monday. Okay, that's different. But if I'm following up with someone that's not returning my call or I'm not getting through to them, no more than once a week was my rule that I used to follow. Any other questions before we wrap it up?
Comment, I
Yeah.
really appreciate the fact that you told us you normally take an hour and a half, 2 hours to do this, and you were able to take a lot of information and be able to condense it down into 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Make it intelligible, means you understand it, you own it. So,
Toastmasters works.
it sure does.
Thank you.
It sure does.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you, everybody.